Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we continue working on our game about one squid's dream to squirt ink everywhere and the inhabitants that hate them for it. And last time we started creating obstacles to add some difficulty to our game. The first was a rock to reduce players' movement options, and the second was a pufferfish. The pufferfish would threaten to undo the player's work if they got too close, which required some alterations to the ink squirting effect, and we managed to end up with some prettier colors in the process without having to actually change any of them. In other words, it was a very promising start to adding difficulty to the game, one that'll hopefully continue with today's plan. We will be adding yet another opposing fish to the game. Like the pufferfish, this new fish will also undo the player's progress, but in a slightly different manner. However, before we can get to that, we're going to conduct an experiment to see if we can improve the shark's presence in our game. Now that sounds like a plan, so let's get to the coding. First, this experiment would require the shark sprite to be broken down into individual parts: a head, the body / fins, and the tail. After a bunch of meddling with the sprite's edges, it was onto the shark code. A new constructor was added to the code to break our shark down into segments. Each struct would contain the X and Y positions and angle for each segment. Next, in the step event, I first attempted this effect by simply having a loop iterate through each segment and have it follow the segment ahead of it. That data was then used to draw the shark's body to the screen. It, didn't work out like I thought it would. Clearly, a more detailed approach would be necessary. Attempt number 2 was a bit more specific. The headpiece would have its own origin point and values assigned to it, with the rest of the body using a more general set of values. And like before, that data would be taken from the previous segment. And it's here you can... that is in fact the result of bad math. Like I was saying, it's here that you can get a better idea of what I'm going for. By segmenting the shark into parts, the movement is far more organic. And indeed, while a general animation would have sufficed, the slow turning code mixed with the segments provides something way more organic than I could have ever animated. Now, I ended up spending way too much time tweaking this thing to get it looking as, perfect as possible. Mostly, I was trying to balance a proper sway speed with making sure that the pixels weren't ruining the illusion. And lowering the resolution provided the best results, likely due to making subpixels not a thing. Though the movement does give off weird visual vibes if you stare at the sharks too long. But eventually the results were satisfactory, outside of the fin being hidden behind the tail segment. So instead of reversing the math for the segments, the fin was made its own segment, which would be layered over top the body. And this ended up working well. Now, I was about to move on, but suddenly inspiration hit. So back in the code, specific conditions were added to make sure that the first sprite drawn is the shark's head and the last sprite drawn is its tail. I then moved the fins to the middle segment of the shark's body. Then I randomized the length of the shark. The results were both hilarious and horrifying. Extending the shark's length by 1 or 2 segments effectively turned our cute little sharks into the stuff of nightmares. As if reverse sharks weren't bad enough, now we had long sharks. So, unfortunately, random shark lengths weren't going to work, at least not without some tweaking. And for the sake of getting something other than sharks done this session, I had to move on. So up next was our second fish to mess with the player, the goatfish. The goatfish would go through a sequence of events similar to the pufferfish, choosing a grid cell, moving towards it, removing the ink from that particular cell, and swimming away. In fact, the sequences are currently so similar, I was basically able to do a copy-paste job. Only instead of affecting an area, the goatfish affects a single cell, which obviously ended up working just as I'd hoped. And if you're curious why I went with the goatfish instead of, say, a burrowing crab or something, I felt like something that burrows would be a bit too persistent for this purpose. And to be honest, I only learned what a goatfish was after talking with my dad, who is a fishing hobbyist. Anyway, these sequences are currently more of a test in terms of behaviors, but after seeing the 2 fish in action, it's clear I need to add a bit more variety to them. But I do like the distinct differences each fish provides as obstacles. The pufferfish are more destructive but avoidable, whereas the goatfish are less destructive but inevitable. And I do have some ideas as to where I want to go with the differences. But unfortunately, I spent so much time working on the sharks that this brings us to the end of the session. So we'll have to pick this up next time. For now, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.